Welcome to Week 1 of Cultures in Conflict. I'll be your guest lecturer for this course, and together we will be digging into some fascinating conflicts from both a historical as well as a current event perspective. Our course text starts out with an introduction of the many authors that contributed to the final product. They emphasize they don't have all of the answers, but feel qualified to speak to the subject of conflict based on each of the author's personal experiences, intuition, imagination, and probably most importantly, the stories of others. The text goes on to state its primary purpose is to present ways of understanding and navigating human relationships across cultural and worldview boundaries in ways that are both readable and practical. The authors say they embarked upon this journey by asking themselves what did they bring to the challenge of understanding and bridging conflicts and cultures. They answer this question very simply. They bring images or word pictures of our collective senses of self drawn from our home cultures. Each of the images is a window into cultural ways of seeing ourselves and others. It is this very point that this course hopes to address. All people are part of one culture or another, and it's based on that culture. Each experiences life in a different way. It's through these experiences that mental imprints are developed, and these are what people use to adopt or accept their values, norms, mores, beliefs, and attitudes by which they live their lives. Often we see these mental imprints come into conflict between cultures, and unless dealt with, they can have long-lasting and devastating effects. The authors go on to acknowledge that even they, as a group, have very different mental imprints, which make them see an issue in very different ways. They state in some cases, however, their different mental imprints allow them to be much more understanding of another group member's views on a particular subject, even if they don't agree with them. It's this idea the authors want to build upon for the sake of conflict resolution. The authors liken this to the South African idea of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. From this idea, the authors emphasize the real overall idea of this course. Unity is not uniformity or sameness, but harmony in the midst of diversity. The authors go on to acknowledge, since diversity involves differences, and some of those differences bring us into conflict, our shared goal is not the elimination of conflict, but finding ways to live well with it. The first example given to demonstrate the ability to live well with conflict is with classical music within the Western cultures of Western Europe, Canada, and the United States. Within the symphonic orchestra, there are many different players of different instruments, strings, brass, wind, and percussion. As with a group, discord does occur at times, but it is always resolved through structure, the sheet music, leadership, the conductor, and shared goals, performing in a well-played performance. Ultimately, through acceptance of difference, the differences are embraced and the end result creates a beautiful end product. Another lesson learned through this experience is the fact that our lives are often enriched through the diversity and the acceptance of it. Next, we learn some Japanese terms related to the ability of one to maintain an open mind as it relates to our cultural differences. The Japanese term shimaguni means an island nation, and konju means human character. When the Japanese put them together, you get shimaguni konju, which describes a person or group that is narrow-minded, has difficulty with adapting to other cultures, and is inward-looking rather than outward-looking. For many reasons, and this might be a study group for you, the Japanese people tend to be an inward-looking people, which makes it difficult to understand some cultural starting points of other people, which can then lead to conflict. The final example given in our text is related to Canada. However, the country itself is not really the issue. What is being described is Canada's willingness to open its borders to a diverse group of immigrants. This process is likened to the sand on the seashore. The sand is soft and warm and is the home of many, but it is also very unstable during turbulent times. The text goes on to make a point that really drives home in many parts of the world. It says, conflict over resources or ways of constructing identities can bring a sting to those whose differences threaten the emerging norms. From this, we have learned a strong sense of community can create ethnocentrism rather than multiculturalism. The bottom line is found in our text, where it emphasizes culture is essential to an understanding of conflict, since culture is a part of every relationship and conflict only arises in relationships. The authors of our text are very open about the conflicts they had to overcome to write this textbook. To do this, they all agreed on 4 basic concepts. First, culture is essential to understanding conflict. Culture is a part of every relationship. Conflict only arises out of relationships. And since people have multiple cultural identities, all conflicts have cultural components. It is upon these 4 concepts that we will approach this course and the subject of conflict across cultures. As a sidebar, our authors emphasize the process that they, as a group, went through to collaborate their ideas on culture and conflict resolution. During this process, they learned 2 very important lessons. First, relationships are essential to conflict resolution. To form these relationships, it requires time, patience, and understanding. It was only through the development of these relationships that they were able to work together, even though their mental imprints were very different from the other members of the working group. They also emphasized that mere differences of perspective can cause significant and repeated conflicts, regardless of the issue at hand. They found that differences in how one views the world can yield recurrent conflicts in which issues seem to change as conflictual dynamics escalate. Next, our authors lay out an overview of the rest of the course text in the form of chapter overviews. In Chapter 2, we will discuss how our culture and conflict are related and the 3 dimensions of conflict: material, symbolic, and relational. In Chapter 3, we will be defining what culture is and where is it at play in our lives. We will also discuss how culture defines us as people and try to become more fluent in other cultures by understanding the diverse constructions of meaning. In Chapter 4, cultural fluency and cultural awareness, both self and others, will be discussed. In Chapter 5, the ways culture and conflict interact with each other will be discussed. Also discussed will be the dynamics of this interaction and the consequences for the resolution of conflicts. In Chapter 6, some ways to avoid the traps, detours, and barriers to conflict resolution will be discussed. We also cover ways for one to exercise flexibility, creative engagement, and momentum in working with conflict resolution. In Chapter 7, we will lay out a kind of a suggested but not prescribed roadmap that emphasizes interdependence and relationships in the resolution of intercultural conflicts. And finally, in Chapter 8, some reflections of the concepts covered in this course will be offered. The chapter will conclude with some unanswered questions. For the purposes of this course, several terms must be defined, and it is important for each student to understand the meaning of each of these terms, as this understanding will guide the student through the written assignments of this course. For the purpose of this course, the terms and their definitions are as follows. Cultural conflict. This course addresses the issue of cultural conflict. That being said, the following is the definition we will use the term during this course. Cultural conflict suggests conflict is caused due to the clash of values, norms, mores, beliefs, and attitudes that arise when different social groups have different ideas of acceptable behavior. In other words, different social groups have different cultural beliefs and ideas which conflict with those of another group, and this conflict occurs. Social issue conflicts. They see society as a field of inequality that generates conflict and social change. Social issue conflict suggests society is structured in ways to benefit a few at the expense of the majority, and factors such as race, sex, class, and age are linked to this perceived social inequality. Geographical conflicts occur when a piece of land lacks adequate legal, institutional, and traditional or customary protection, and its rightful ownership becomes the subject of controversy and disagreement between the aggrieved parties. As a result, a land conflict can become a commodity that is easily subject to manipulation and abuse. Religious conflicts are a complex phenomenon that engages a combination of contested domains, such as ideology and morality, power, personality, space, place, and group identity, in turn enabled by a range of other conditions, such as political, social, economic, cultural, and psychological. Note, this is one of the best definitions of religious conflict I have ever read. It's for this reason here I recorded it as an exact quote. More to come on that in week 5, though. Ethnic conflicts, I am referencing conflict that is a result of ethnicity, normally due to race. There are many ways one could go with this, but for the purposes of this course, we are going to assume that one or more of the parties involved in the conflict have or are perceived to have racist views towards the opposing ethnic group, and thus the following will be our definition. An ethnic conflict is a belief that ethnicity is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that ethnicity or racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. It is a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. It's also a political or social system founded on racism, or a racial prejudice or discrimination. This comes from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Gender conflicts are conflict that is a result of gender. Again, like race conflicts, there are many ways one could go with this, but for the purposes of this course, we are going to assume one or more of the parties involved in the conflict have or are perceived to have sexist views towards the opposing person or group, and thus the following from Merriam-Webster will be our definition. It is prejudice or discrimination based on sex, especially discrimination against women. It is also behavior, conditions, or attitudes that foster stereotypes of social roles based on sex. Class conflict, also called class struggle, is conflict between different classes in a community, resulting from social or economic positions and reflecting opposing interests. Class conflict is also called class war or class warfare, according to Marx, and it is the struggle for political and economic power carried on between capitalists and workers. A political conflict is a positional difference regarding values relevant to a society. The conflict items between at least two decisive and directly involved actors, which is being carried out using observable and interrelated conflict means that lie beyond established regulatory procedures and threaten a core state function or the order of international law or hold out the prospect to do so. This is from the Connias Research Institute. I hope after this overview you're as excited about digging into this course as I am. Remember to thoroughly read your weekly case study before answering your discussion questions and beginning your assignment. Also, skip ahead to week 8 and take a look at your final project expectations. It would be a good idea to start thinking now of a topic so you can have plenty of time for research and reflection. Have a great week.